Before George Orwell was down and out in Paris and London, and before Jack Kerouac was hitchhiking across the great highways of North America, there was John Griffith Cheney, better known as Jack London. I don't want to use too much hyperbole, but it is genuinely difficult to overstate the importance and influence of Jack London on world literature. For one, he died more than a century ago, but download any e-reader today and there's a very good chance that the free ebook it comes with will either be The Call of the Wild or White Fang. London's writing is notable for its passionate support of labour unions, for its sympathy for the working classes, and also for its depictions of the harshness of the natural world. However, he never would have been able to write about these things with so much authenticity had he not have had some incredible and eye-opening adventures of his own. So today on Out of the Page, I want to take a look at the experiences which were so influential on London's writing and the encounters that gave him his true education on the road. Jack London was born in 1876 in San Francisco into a family his father had already abandoned before his birth. His mother later remarried and the family moved to Oakland, California, but much of London's upbringing was in the working class and his only formal education was grade school. When he was 10 years old, he found a sympathetic librarian in the Oakland Public Library who helped him further his education through self-learning. At the age of only 13, London took a job working 12 to 18 hours a day in a cannery, which was followed by a failed venture at becoming an oyster pirate, which is exactly what it sounds like. He took jobs on various boats throughout his teens and even sailed as far as Japan. On returning, he worked hard labour roles before the US was plunged into a serious economic depression called the Panic of '93. This caused widespread unemployment and mass homelessness and led many young men to seek their chances in life on the road. Thus, in his late teens, London crisscrossed North America by hopping freight trains, running from police, begging for food and sleeping rough everywhere he went. He was jailed for 30 days in Erie County and even joined Kelly's Army, which was a protest army of unemployed men. Eventually, the harshness of the road led London to seek a better life. He returned to Oakland and completed high school. He dreamed of completing university, but along came the Klondike Gold Rush and he couldn't resist the call. At age 21, he left for the brutal terrain of the Canadian Yukon, eventually returning home malnourished, sick and poor, but with a world of stories at his fingertips. He was able to have some short stories published, but these barely paid enough for him to get by, and he considered quitting many times. He spent a number of weeks living rough in the slums of London in 1902 in order to understand the plight of its poor residents, and this is around the time he decided to properly pursue writing as a means of escaping working life. In 1903, when London was 27 years old, The Call of the Wild was first published, and the rest honestly is history. He died not much more than a decade later at age 40, and at that point he was one of the most well-known writers in the world. Jack London is unusual in a lot of ways. For one, considering he died at age 40, he was incredibly prolific. He has 23 novels to his name, and that is not including all of his non-fiction writing, his short story collections, and his poetry, but also, most importantly, his memoirs. But the main way in which he was unusual was that he honestly lived what he wrote about. He certainly wasn't the first writer to speak about the living conditions of the down and out, but he was the most popular, and I think the main reason for that is the authenticity with which he was able to write about it. And we see examples of this in almost everything he wrote. In The People of the Abyss, which is his book about the degradation faced by those living in the inner slums of London, the book was so realistic because he himself had lived amongst those people and was able to speak from authority about those experiences. His famous short story, To Build a Fire, is the tragic and brilliant tale of a man and a dog trekking through the Yukon in sub-zero conditions. It's also full of local knowledge and first-hand accounts of descriptions of life in the desolate Canadian wilderness, the same one that London lived in during the Klondike Gold Rush. There are of course many other examples of this as well. The Sea Wolf, for example, was inspired by his experiences on the ocean, and most directly The Road, which is his thrilling and entertaining memoirs about his teenage life train hopping across the continent. I mentioned at the start the influence of London on world literature, and the truth is that without him, Orwell may never have undertaken his own journey tramping across southern England, and there's a chance that Jack Kerouac would never have left New York. Both men had read London's writing in their youths, and resolved, in Kerouac's own words, to become a lonesome traveller just like him. The difference between these writers and London, of course, is that London wasn't inspired by other writers to seek out that life. He didn't pursue adventure in order to write about it. With him, it happened the other way around. About 2/3 of the way through the road, he tells the story about how his travels first started, and I think it perfectly summarizes his spirit as a wanderer. He and a friend had sailed up the coast of California to retrieve another friend's boat, but instead of returning it straight away, they sail up the Sacramento River. When they reach the city, they tie the boat up and find themselves hanging out and swimming with another group of young men. And as they speak, London begins to realize that these boys were road kids. They show off to him a little bit and tell him stories about their own exploits hopping across North America on freight trains. And he lies there and listens to them and describes what it felt like to hear their words. I continued to lie in the sand and listen. These wanderers made my oyster piracy look like 30 cents. A new world was calling to me in every word that was spoken, and it all spelled adventure. Very well, I would tackle this new world. And on top of all that, London is an excellent writer. I couldn't recommend his books enough if I tried, considering how long ago he died and how old his writing is by today's standards. It holds up, it is thrilling, it is entertaining, and I would love to convince somebody to read that free ebook that's sitting on your phone or your Kindle after all. So if you haven't given it a try, strong recommendation from me. Thank you for watching the video, and if you've subscribed to the channel lately, thank you as well. I just hit 150 subscribers, which doesn't sound like much to anybody else, but to me is a hell of a milestone, so thank you for that. I'll be back soon with more videos, so leave a like, leave a comment, tell me your thoughts on London. He wrote many books, so if you've got an off-the-wall favorite or recommendation, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for watching again. I'll be back very soon, so until then, I will see you later.